History on the Hill. Francis to be the first pope ever to address a joint session of the U.S. Congress. A mother's sorrow. We talk with the mother of slain journalist James Foley about faith sustaining her through deep sadness. Escaping slavery. A woman who is now free helps others trapped in the dark world of forced prostitution. And Pope Francis is at it again, talking online to kids with disabilities and making a confession of his own. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, February 5th, 2015. Good evening from our nation's capital. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. History will be made here in Washington this fall. House Speaker John Boehner confirms today Pope Francis will address a joint session of the U.S. Congress on September 24th.
That day, His Holiness will be the first pope in our history to address a joint session of Congress. We're humbled that the Holy Father has accepted our invitation and certainly look forward to receiving his message on behalf of the American people.
Boehner says the Holy Father's message of compassion and human dignity has moved people of all faiths and backgrounds. From Washington, Francis will go to New York, where he is likely to address the UN General Assembly. His U.S. visit in the fall will climax with the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. Archbishop Charles Chaput of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia joining us from Rome, right after meeting with Pope Francis. Your Excellency, what new information can you share with us after meeting with the Holy Father today?
I don't know if I have any new information. We talked about two things. We talked about the World Meeting of Families, of course, but he also was curious about the life of the church in Philadelphia. So actually, we spent more time talking about Philadelphia than we talked about the World Meeting of Families. We have a plan in place that the Pope is examining, and we hope that we'll have a pretty definitive answer soon on what exactly he's going to do.
Does the Pope sound excited about his visit? What is he saying about it?
I was amazed at how calm and cool the Pope was about everything. He seemed to be very, very serene and very much in control of the facts about what's going on and the planning for the World Meeting of Families. He certainly is excited about coming, and he promised me he'd do his best to move our church to a more positive, joyful, and confident place, and it's been because of the struggles we've had in Philadelphia.
So Philadelphia stands to gain quite a bit from this visit economically, but really from your seat, I'm sure you're looking at the life of the church. What do you see happening with the Holy Father coming there in person?
I was the privileged to be the Bishop of Denver after the visit of Pope John Paul II for the World Youth Day there, and it was amazing what a difference his visit made in the life of the church. It made the church much more evangelical, much more enthusiastic, much more confident about itself. And I'm really hoping that the same gift will be given to the Church of Philadelphia through the visit of Pope Francis. So we're looking forward to it, not only in terms of the enthusiasm of the moment, but the enduring legacy of the graces of a papal visit.
House Speaker John Boehner confirmed today the Holy Father will make history and address a joint session of Congress here in Washington. We know he'll go on to New York to address the UN General Assembly, then on to the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. Our Holy Father is truly a world leader. I mean, just seen in this series of events for this plan. How does it feel to be in the middle of all that?
It's pretty exciting to be in the middle of all this. Of course, being from Philadelphia, we think the last part of his visit is the most important. And it is the pastoral part of his visit to not only the Church of Philadelphia, but also to the families of the world. And no matter what happens at the United Nations, no matter what happens in Washington, D.C., what's really important for all of us is what happens in our families. So we think that the World Meeting of Families is the most important part of his visit.
I'm sure many of us would agree with you. Your Excellency, Archbishop Charles Chaput of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, joining us from Rome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The White House plans to ask Congress soon for authority to use U.S. military force against the Islamic State. But House Speaker John Boehner warns it won't be easy to pass that measure. This as Jordan strikes back against ISIS in Syria. Jordan's King Abdullah has vowed to wage a harsh war against the terrorists after they burned a captive Jordanian pilot alive. A gruesome video of the killing was released earlier this week, and Jordan responded by executing 2 al-Qaeda prisoners. Christians in Jordan are gathering to pray for an end to the violence.
We came here today to pray for the soul of our dear pilot who was burned alive with no mercy and with such cruelty. We pray that the violence in the Arab world will end.
Jordan's king paid his respects to the pilot's family earlier today as warplanes roared overhead. The mothers of 2 captured American journalists are raising awareness about the dangers reporters face in their work, especially in the Middle East. Wyatt Goolsbee is at Washington's Museum. That's a museum dedicated to journalism, where he talked with both of those moms. Wyatt?
Yes, Brian, I sat down with both Diane Foley and Deborah Tice, 2 Catholic women speaking here about their sons James Foley and Austin Tice. Now, they say right now they really have to lean on their faith daily, especially when they see more headlines like these coming out of the Middle East.
Yet again.
And, you know, it's just more of this evil in the world, you know? And so if people of faith don't stand up and say enough, otherwise evil wins, right?
Both Diane Foley and Deborah Tice described the violence in the Middle East as horrific. New images of hostages in orange jumpsuits remind Foley of her son James. He was killed in August after being held hostage for almost 2 years in Syria. Now she wants people to know about the plight of journalists and for the government to be held accountable for actions taken to rescue its own citizens.
We were asked to trust, not talk to the media, and just trust that they were taking care of things, and Jim was the highest priority. But I really, as time went on, I saw very little evidence that that was the case.
Deborah Tice hopes the government can help her son Austin. He's a freelance journalist covering the war in Syria and has been missing for more than 2 years. The last time she saw him was in a shaky YouTube video in 2012, being held by militants.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus.
I came to the end of who I am and myself pretty quickly. And so it really is just God's grace that puts my feet on the floor in the morning. And I know that I'm going to get through this day. And this day is the only day I have to get through.
Tice says in the years since, she has received an outpouring of support from individuals and churches telling her they are praying Austin will be freed. Foley has started a foundation named after her son. It's aimed at creating a support network and pushing for governments around the world to prevent kidnapping.
It's because I trust that God is going to use Jim's horrific death for good. Jim would have wanted that. God wants that. God wants us to take all situations and somehow imbue them with His goodness so that we can make right this wrong.
And Brian, it really was fascinating being able to talk with both Diane and Deborah about this. And you know, we're going to have more of this conversation and show you more on Monday as well, including part of the interview where we talk about Pope Francis making a personal phone call to Diane Foley and what he had to say to her. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsbee, thank you. That is a story you'll only see here on EWTN News Nightly. Well, the leaders of France and Germany traveled to Kiev and Moscow with a proposal to end the fighting in eastern Ukraine. This push for peace comes as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrives in Ukraine to support the embattled government. Fighting between Russia-backed separatists and Ukrainian forces has intensified in recent weeks, and the death toll has risen to more than 5,300 since April. Kerry is urging Russia to show its commitment to a peaceful solution.
We want a diplomatic resolution, but we cannot close our eyes to tanks that are crossing the border from Russia and coming in to Ukraine.
Secretary Kerry did not mention U.S. providing lethal military aid to Ukraine in his address. In aid to Russia's president welcomed the new European initiative, saying the Kremlin is ready for a constructive discussion. Well, a 72-year-old survivor of yesterday's Taiwanese plane crash speaks out about his narrow escape.
I felt something was not right after the plane took off. The flight was not full. I told the woman next to me that we should unbuckle our seatbelts, hold on to the seat and cover our heads. I just finished saying it and then the plane went down.
The main part of the wreckage has been pulled out of the river. Of the 58 people on board, at least 32 died. Victims' relatives today performed traditional mourning rituals on the riverbank, and divers continue searching for those who are still missing. Pope Francis urges all bishops and religious superiors to cooperate with his sex abuse commission. In a letter released today, Francis said the commission is an important new way to encourage the Church's commitment to taking whatever steps are necessary to ensure children are protected. Families need to know that the Church is making every effort to protect their children, the Pope said. Priority must not be given to any other kind of concern, whatever its nature, such as a desire to avoid scandal, since there is absolutely no place in ministry for those who abuse minors. The Commission is preparing to meet for the first time with all of its members. Today's National Prayer Breakfast here in Washington drew 36,000 people from more than 100 countries to the nation's capital. It also drew criticism. Suzanne LaFranchi is here tonight with more on that.
Yeah, a little bit of criticism and controversy for the president tonight, Brian. The annual prayer breakfast is supposed to bring people of all faiths together, but ironically, it highlighted division among many groups. President Obama tried to show condemnation of all religious extremism. Calling the Islamic State a death cult, the president focused on religious extremists.
As people of faith, we are summoned to push back against those who try to distort our religion, any religion, for their own nihilistic ends.
The president personally welcomed the Dalai Lama.
Powerful example of what it means to practice compassion, and who inspires us to speak up for the freedom and dignity of all human beings.
It was the first time the president and the Tibetan Buddhist leader attended the same public event, but they were not photographed together at the breakfast. The Dalai Lama last visited the White House 4 years ago in a private meeting. It angered China. The communist government objects to his quest for greater autonomy from Beijing. Outside, there were signs of division and the desire for greater religious liberty. Sudanese activists say breakfast organizers invited 2 war criminals accused of atrocities.
Mr. President, to keep the promise that the genocide must stop.
Former Congressman Chris Shea says the U.S. must do more to defend religious liberty, both domestically and internationally.
I don't think any of our elected leaders are doing what they could, including me when I was there.
Olivia Enos is an expert on religious liberty in Asia.
Chinese Christians are extremely persecuted, beaten, tortured.
She believes the Obama administration has been particularly silent on the issue of religious liberty.
I think it can be more outspoken, particularly in areas like China, where we see gross violations of religious liberty against people of all faiths, whether they're Tibetan Buddhists or Muslim Uyghurs or Chinese Christians.
Tonight, Catholic League President Bill Donahue is calling on Mr. Obama to apologize for his, quote, attempt to deflect guilt from Muslim madmen. Donahue is referring to Obama's comments during his speech about the Crusades, saying people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. Donahue says the president's comparisons to the Crusades and the Inquisition are not only historically inaccurate, but they are insulting to Christians. Brian?
I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that. Thank you, Suzanne LaFranchi. Coming up, smugglers take advantage of millions of refugees from Syria's 4-year civil war. And Pope Francis admits he knows nothing about computers as he holds a Google Hangout for kids with disabilities. Listen to this thought from Pope Francis's homily today. He said, I sometimes describe the church as a field hospital. There are many wounded. How many wounded? How many people who need their wounds to be healed? Thank you for joining us on this Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Hundreds of protesters accusing the Indian government of not investigating recent church attacks and vandalism are detained tonight. Several protesters, including some priests and nuns, were dragged onto buses by police. The protest comes after a New Delhi church was vandalized on Monday. Holy objects in the church were desecrated. This is the 5th such attack on a Christian church in India since December. Archbishop Anil Kuto has condemned the vandalism, expressing concern about the attacks. Pope Francis decries the inhuman conditions facing migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. He wrote a letter to a Jesuit priest who helps organize Catholic teens in Nogales, Arizona. The Holy Father encourages frontier communities to welcome migrants and to work to end discrimination. Francis will likely raise immigration issues when he addresses that joint session of Congress this coming September. Well, a nearly 4-year-old civil war in Syria has turned millions of Syrians into refugees. Smugglers are taking advantage of those seeking safety. Catherine Zeltner is here with that story.
Brian, many of those Syrian refugees are seeking better lives in Europe. But in a new human trafficking tactic, Smugglers are using the refugees as cargo ship crews across the Mediterranean. High seas drama in the Mediterranean. A freighter hurtling out of control toward Italy with no crew aboard and hundreds of Syrians as cargo. Rescuers found 350 panicked migrants, including women and children, desperate to get off the ship. Masked smugglers had locked them in cattle pens days earlier. They had only broken out once they discovered they had been abandoned. Heavy seas preventing the crew from boarding.
It was very difficult and too risky to board the vessel in the weather.
Eventually, the freighter ran out of fuel and was towed to an Italian port. Smugglers counting on a heavy demand from the 3 million people fleeing war in Syria. The ships being pointed toward Europe on automatic pilot without a crew, often in deplorable conditions.
It was made for carrying cattle or sheep or cow or whatever, so the living conditions were not for humans.
Just days before the rescue, the Italian Coast Guard saved migrants crammed aboard another converted freighter. On board, nearly 800 people, almost all Syrians, cold and seasick after being tossed about in rough weather for days. They likely paid between $4,000 and $8,000 US, giving gangs millions in profit from one ship that costs considerably less.
There was no smugglers on board. There was no pilot on board. Even the crew, they weren't crew. They were like some people like me, refugees.
This Syrian refugee was rescued from a cargo ship in December. He watched a refugee pilot the cargo ship he was on.
We said that they left the ship, but they didn't leave the ship because they weren't with us anyway. And the guy who drove the ship, he was a refugee.
The newest tactic? Allowing traffickers to profit from the safety of shore. Catherine Seltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. Very disturbing. Pope Francis has made a confession of sorts. He doesn't have a clue about how to work computers. That's what he said during a Google Hangout with several kids with disabilities from around the world. This was part of a conference of his Scholas initiative, bringing young people together through sports, art, and technology. Alicia from Spain asked Francis if he liked taking photos with his computer. Francis replied, "Do you want me to tell you the truth? I'm a disaster with machines. I don't know how to work a computer. What a shame." Up next, a woman who escaped a life of forced prostitution shares her story with us. And millions flock to the frozen north of Japan to take in snow and ice art. On this 5th of February, we celebrate St. Agatha, Virgin and Martyr. As a young girl, she dedicated herself to God. According to legend, Agatha was tortured to death for resisting marriage. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and a conference on women is underway at the Vatican this week, sponsored by the Pontifical Council for Culture. Women from around the world were asked to share short videos about their life and perspective. This promotional video for the conference, featuring a blonde Italian actress, has drawn criticism from all sides here in North America. Some have called it too liberal, others say it isn't feminist enough. The video remains on the event's website. Organizers of the conference are trying to return the focus back to the topics such as women's equality in the church and society.
For us male people, it means trying to get into the shoes of a woman's shoes and to look at the world with different eyes, a sort of pastoral conversion, as the Pope asks.
The conference on the life of women runs for 3 days, ending tomorrow. Professor Jane Adolph works at the Holy See's Secretary of State and Associate Professor of Law at Ave Maria School of Law in Florida, joining us by satellite from Naples. So how do you see this happening practically, that the Pope wants a greater role for women in the church? What do you think can happen here?
Well, when you use the term church, I think you have to realize that as a layperson, I'm part of the church, whether I'm working for the Secretary of State or I'm not. And when we were talking about specifically, for example, the Roman Curia, I think if that's the question, then one way would be to hire competent, well-formed women and place them in positions of decision-making authority that does not require, obviously, the sacrament of orders. That's one way.
Well, there's a conference of the life of women in the church going on right now, put together by the Pontifical Council for Culture, yet this council is all male. What do you make of that?
Well, in terms of what I have seen so far, there is a outcome document. It's a draft document that was written by a group of women who I understand are associated either as consultants for or as consultors for the Pontifical Council for Culture. I also understand that there will be women coming in and presenting. So I'm not quite sure that it's the women are not going to be visible. I think the issue might be, are there going to be only women from one culture, namely the Italian culture? And I think that's an issue.
Well, Pope Francis seems very sincere about involving women more in the hierarchy of the church, other than holy orders, as you mentioned. Do you think that the other people in the Vatican are in tune with this and will follow through with the Pope's wishes?
Well, it's quite interesting. If you go to the outcome document that's online from the Pontifical Council for Culture that was drafted by this group of women in consultation with the Council, it talks about women's cultures. And I think that first, before trying to insert women into more roles, etc., one has to understand the culture of the Roman Curia. And I think that the Pope himself did a wonderful job in pointing out some of the issues in his December 22nd address to the Roman Curia, to the cardinals, and also he highlighted various other points to the employees that work in Vatican City State. And so I think we have to talk about what is the culture before we can analyze how we can make it more, if you will, women-friendly.
Professor Jane Adolph joining us by satellite from Naples, Florida. Thank you.
Thank you.
And slavery is not just something from history books. People are bought, sold, and abused today here in America and worldwide. This Sunday marks the Vatican's first International Day of Prayer and Awareness Against Human Trafficking. Jason Calvi found a Virginia woman who is all too familiar with modern-day slavery.
At age 12, Barbara Amaya ran away from an abusive home. She found consolation in a man she met.
He was so understanding and how he was, my protector. I call it the cult of human trafficking because we're programmed. You are programmed.
Barbara was manipulated to walk the streets and sell her body.
I've been stabbed, shot, shoved downstairs, thrown out of cars.
The police arrested her over and over again.
I was 13, 14, 15, 16, 17,
At about
18,
16,
19, she
was
20,
jailed
21,
on Rikers
22.
Island in New York. Freedom at last was a phone call away.
They found my family in Virginia. I was scheduled to go home, and they, opened the door to this room, and opened the door, and my trafficker was standing there.
She spent another 5 years on the streets.
Having sex with a minor is rape, and I was a child. I wasn't an adult.
In her early 20s, she was helped by a caring counselor who helped her find freedom from slavery, from heroin, and from an unhappy childhood. But Barbara locked the memories deep inside her mind. It all came back one night when her own daughter ran away. She didn't know her mom's story.
I never wanted her to think anything bad about me.
Barbara's story took place on the streets in New York City, but human trafficking can happen not just in the Big Apple, but in cities and towns across the country.
This is a social ill that exists in nearly every country in the world. It is as common in Wichita, Kansas, as it is in Bangkok, Thailand.
Barbara's getting the word out to young people with a comic book and her work at Seraphim Global, which helps abuse victims. She also lobbies for laws to help victims.
A great deal of history has been changed by individuals. One person can make a difference.
In Northern Virginia, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. And more than 2 million people are expected to visit Japan's giant showcase of ice and snow sculptures. They brave the northern city of Sapporo's near-zero temperatures to see 200-plus frozen creations. That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for joining us. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and God bless you.